Hi, friends. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. My name's Allie. I'm your host and founder of the Realistic Nurse Movement. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and share this with a friend. This is our first space in healthcare where we can talk about anything, uncensored, unfiltered, all the truth. And I realized we needed this space quickly because I shared my story online and thousands of you have messaged me saying that you share a similar story or you've heard a story like this, or we need to talk more about this. And it's true. We need a space where we can talk about anything and everything because for decades we've been silenced. And that's truly why we're in this mess of healthcare today, because there haven't been enough people speaking up or able to speak up and tell their stories. For the past few years, people have been silenced and threatened and kicked off platforms. So I want to take today to tell you guys my full story, why I'm here, what I'm doing, why I even started this podcast in the first place. A lot of you found me on Instagram or TikTok and know parts of my story, but I've still gotten a lot of messages and confusion, people that want clarity on what happened. I also want to tell you guys my story because it perfectly paints the picture of the healthcare industry. Every single thing that I went through just shows you how corrupt the medical system is at every angle. When I finally had the guts to share my story online, I had so many people reach out to me and tell me that they are going through the same thing or they went through the same thing. And it was honestly a shock to me because I wasn't expecting that kind of response. I don't know what I was expecting. I was just putting my story out into the world, and it took me by surprise the amount of people who are also suffering and struggling and truly getting hurt by the system. We really need a place where we can talk about these things out loud and the public can hear us and truly know what's happening behind closed doors. I just don't think we have a space for that yet, and that's why I'm here. I'm here to create that space for us. I think it's important that we have a space where we can tell the truth about what's happening. I think it's important that we don't have censorship and we don't feel like we have to hold anything back, because for the past 5 decades, that's all they've put on the back of healthcare workers is that we have to be quiet and we just have to do our jobs and we just have to get through this. But push comes to shove and turns out that's not the way you run this type of business. So I want to start from the very beginning, from when I first started in healthcare. This is back when I graduated high school. I went to college in Reno, Nevada, and I started my psychology degree at the University of Nevada, Reno, and decided that that was not the path for me. Psychology just wasn't my thing. So I just switched to a general community health science degree at that time and decided to get my EMT license. I got a job at the local ambulance company. I was washing ambulances while I was going to EMT school. Quickly learned that pre-hospital medicine just wasn't for me. And that was honestly my first red flag that I should have noticed, because everyone at that company just seemed burned out and run to the ground and just genuinely unhappy with their job. And my perspective at that time was, it's just probably the ambulance company. This is probably managed wrong. They are the only ambulance company that runs 911 calls in Reno. So ground zero a lot, running around a lot and not getting breaks, obviously. And it's just normalized. The people were burnt out. I didn't want to continue working there because I didn't want that environment. So after I got my EMT license, I applied at an emergency room to be an ER tech. That's where you can do EKGs, you do vitals on patients. In some places you can start IVs depending on your EMT, the level of your license. And it was really good for me. I realized, okay, I like the pace of the emergency room. I wanted the adrenaline. Obviously, I always, my whole life, wanted to save lives and help people. And I still had the picture of healthcare in my head of what they show the general public on TV and in movies. And you see ambulances going by and you're like, man, they're just saving lives every day. That's how I thought of healthcare. And so I went to nursing school while I worked as an emergency room tech. And this is where I started letting myself down, I think. I worked night shift as an ER tech 3 days a week at least, and I was going to nursing school full time. And so I would get off night shift, let's say on a Friday from 7 to 7, then I would go to a clinical from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then I would sleep, of course, after being up for 24 hours. And then I would study probably on a Sunday. Mind you, I was trying to make a living too. I was trying to pay for my bills while I was going to school. I was doing my best. So sometimes I worked 3-4 days a week, sometimes 5 on night shift, mainly because I could do some homework on night shift. So at least I'm making money and getting my work done for school. So I worked in this emergency room for 3 years as an ER tech. I was cross-trained as a unit clerk, which is where you work with the doctors. You get, if you need to transfer a patient, you get ambulances set up, you get doctors connected, you connect with specialties if they need a consult, you get patients admitted. You're basically running the flow of the department. I really felt that this was an asset for me because now I know the flow of the department. I know patient care. I know tasking. I know where everything is. I know how to assess patients. I listen to the nurses. And I truly did everything I could to make sure I was the best nurse I was once I graduated nursing school. And I was so excited to work in this ER. I got close with all the nurses and the staff and the doctors, and I really dedicated myself to being a good nurse when I was done. And I remember it was my 5th semester of nursing school, and I failed med-surg. It was med-surg 3. And I remember the moment sitting on that test when I hit the final exam. I hit finish, and it said you failed. And I just remember sitting there. I was pretty much in shock. I'd never failed anything in my life. And then, of course, I started crying. Sitting there at the computer, everyone's still pretty much taking their test. I was a quick test taker. Whether I knew the answer or not, I wasn't going to sit there and try and make it up. But that's the thing about nursing school. The questions they ask, they include the right answers. You just have to pick the best answer. And that always messed me up because, one, I'm already an anxious tester. I have test anxiety. It's sometimes almost impossible to answer a question the way they ask them in nursing school. But anyway, regardless, I failed med-surg 3 and just started bawling my eyes out when the test closed and telling my teacher, I just don't understand. This isn't what we do in the hospital. This isn't what we do in real life, and none of it makes sense to me. The book doesn't match reality. What are we doing? I was just so upset because it just didn't make sense to me. I study so hard and I work so hard, and it just didn't connect to reality. But that should have been another red flag. So I retook med-surg that semester. That's the only class I could take with the school. You don't move on with your class. You just retake the one course. And of course, this is a private school, so it was $4,000 to retake the class. But anyway, retook the class, passed, easy, got through it next semester, and then I started thinking about where I wanted to work. But I knew I wanted to work in the emergency room I was already in. I remember going to my director and talking to her about it, and I remember her saying, I don't think you're ready. Do you want to try working on tele first? No shame on tele or any other floor, but I worked in the ER. I wanted to be in the ER. And I understood that new grads don't usually work in the ER, but I just thought that I proved that I was ready. I had the skills. I was just such a hard worker, but I was like, okay, maybe this is just how it goes. I gave it a couple weeks, and she had offered the position to another person before me who had no bedside clinical experience really. And I realized something else was going on here. This wasn't just that she didn't think I was ready. This was probably a little more personal than, do I have the skills? Do I have what it takes to be an emergency room nurse as a new grad? Finally, the manager, the task was delegated to him to offer the position to me, and I was ecstatic, pushed the other stuff away, never thought about it for a while. I was just like, cool, I'm ready. I'm going to jump in, prove to everyone I worked for this. I know what I'm doing. I'm ready to learn. I'm always open to learn. I will always ask questions, but I'm ready for this. I'm ready for this challenge. And so I graduated in February of 2020 and passed my NCLEX pretty quickly after that. Started my first day as a nurse in March of 2020. I remember my first week very clearly. I remember my first day, the director telling us, she said, "We're okay. We have enough PPE. Everything's okay. We're good." And maybe 2 days later, we're just tossing masks, using them like they are supposed to be used. The gyms start shutting down, restaurants start shutting down. This was the day gyms were shutting down. I remember all my coworkers were freaking out. I remember the ER director coming in and saying, "There are no masks. We're going to have to start reusing. And we're going to have to start reusing everything because there's a mask shortage." I remember just thinking, this just doesn't make sense. Like 2 days ago, you said we're good. Everything's fine. And let me tell you, during COVID, every single day changed. And I get they didn't know what was happening, but it just didn't make sense. It was just every day there was a new fear, a new scare tactic. It was just something new that they couldn't control every single day. And I want to talk about my experience with COVID because I think we've all had such different experiences. Some people had mass population in their hospital. Some people's hospitals were completely empty. And I think it's important that we talk about it because the public needs to hear every view. Like I said, every population, every area was different. And I'm interested in what other nurses saw, but I want to tell you guys what I saw. I remember the first month of the shutdown when they were like, "No one leave your house. It's just going to be a week," or whatever it was. So it's going to be 2 weeks. The hospital I was working at, the emergency room would shut their doors and you would have to come in one by one. And I remember they were telling people to avoid hospitals unless you are dying, which is what you should be doing anyway. But our emergency room was empty for about 2 weeks. Empty. We would get the occasional code. I had really sick patients because the only people that were coming in were really sick. So I had strokes, I had codes, I had STEMIs, I had a pediatric drowning. I had very sick patients as a new grad. So that was a plus in a sense because I was learning how to take care of sick patients and know what a sick patient looks like because not a lot of people can see that right away as a new grad. And that's important in the emergency room because when you're triaging patients, you need to know who's sick. And so first 2 weeks, very empty, very sick people. And then I remember my ER director saying, "You have to tell people to come to the hospital. They're afraid. People are dying at home." All this fear language, these fear tactics, I just never caught up. I never caught on to. But now that I think about it, I'm like, man, they were putting so much fear on us. And then my first COVID patient came in. I gowned up. This was the time when one person, one roll at a time. So my preceptor would stand on the other side of the door and I would have a walkie-talkie and be, communicating what's happening. The respiratory therapist was in there with me and I'm trying to start an IV. He's very sick, not breathing well. And I get the IV and I'm trying to drop blood and I'm drawing straight from the line. So there's no pigtail or anything and it starts clotting on me and I can't transfer it into blood tubes or blood culture tubes. And I'm telling my preceptor, I said, it's rock hard the second it removes from the vein. The second I take it out into the syringe, it just rock hard. And I'd never seen something like this. And I tried doing like straight blood tubes with a vacutainer and that also was clotting. And I had never seen something like this. This patient was obese, diabetic, and had predispositions and within hours died. That was my first COVID patient. And that was when I was like, oh, okay, something's happening. This isn't a normal thing. I've seen many people come in with viruses. And obviously, I'm a new grad, so I have to be open to what's happening. And so that was my introduction to COVID as a new grad. My first patient that died on me was a COVID patient. Then they kind of all started coming in like that, but different. They would come in and they would say that they felt tired and a little bit of short of breath, but they didn't look unhealthy. And I had a patient that I hooked up to the pulse ox to check their oxygen saturation, and it was like 37%. And I was like, there's no way. A good waveform, everything. They were just sitting there. There's no way that you're 37%. And so I put a sticker one on because sometimes those read better. And no, it was like 42%. So I hooked him up on a nasal cannula, and this patient went up to like 92%. That was also something I had never seen before. Working in the ER as a tech, doing a lot of vitals, is a person having a conversation with me, not looking like they're in distress, just feeling tired, and their oxygen saturation being 30-something%. That's just not something we saw normally, and it was happening daily with a lot of people. And so for about a few months, it was bad. It was the people that were just getting taken out that had comorbidities, obesity, diabetes, and autoimmune disorders, the elderly, just wiping them out. After that wave is when we just started seeing more of the fevers, the cold symptoms, and it just, kind of leveled out after that. So that was my experience with COVID. Obviously, COVID went on for a long time after that, but it was just cold symptoms. And then weirdly, the non-emergency things started coming back into the ER, like abdominal pain. During COVID, abdominal pain vanished. Nobody had abdominal pain during COVID. That just wasn't a thing that came into the ER when that's usually like 60% of our patients is abdominal pain, which I would also like to talk about because there's a reason we have so many abdominal pain patients. And that reason is in our food, but that's a conversation for another day. Anyway, so I started travel nursing and I loved it. I was somewhere for 3 months and then moved on to the next place, and it truly made me realize how common it is for hospitals to not run well and for employees to be unhappy at. After traveling for about a year, I realized that all hospitals are pretty much the same, and most people are unhappy with where they work because of these horrible environments. And when I left my staff job, I realized, wow, I was in a very toxic environment and I turned into a very toxic person just being in that environment and being a very naive, new nurse to the culture of hospitals. And that culture is very abusive, and most people often just take it. But seeing all these different cultures in different areas and different populations and different ways management handles things and management works, it just clicked. The environment you work in will change everything. The environment you work in will change the way you're able to be a nurse or be a healthcare worker. I worked in hospitals where there were unions, and you had a break nurse and you had a lunch nurse, and it was really well ran. But nurses were still unhappy because even though they're staffed well and they're getting paid well, the job itself is still unfulfilling because nobody's getting better. So nurses might not realize this, but even in unionized hospitals, where they're getting paid better, where they have better ratios, they're still unhappy because this job is not fulfilling anymore because nobody is getting better. So fast forward, I'm travel nursing. I'm enjoying it more than I did as a staff nurse because I'm not getting caught up in hospital politics and I'm in control of my schedule. I have a month off between each contract where I can do what I want and I have time to take care of myself and regroup before the next contract. I'm back at a hospital that I had a previous contract at before. It's about a year later, and it was great. Really, this was my favorite hospital that I ever worked at. A great group of people to work with. It was a trauma center, so I got to see things that I didn't get to see before because I never worked at a level 2 trauma center. I worked night shift. It was one night in triage when I was triaging a patient. All of a sudden, I started getting tunnel vision, but it wasn't tunnel vision like I ever got before. It was just everything started moving away, and then I couldn't hear anything. It sounded like people were miles and miles away from me. So I got my travel partner and I told him, I don't feel right. I need to sit down. Can't see right. I can't hear right. He took me to a different room. He got the charge nurse. And I remember sitting down. I could hear them slightly, but they were so far away and I couldn't reply. I was kind of just stuck in this tunnel. And then I don't remember anything at all. I had a seizure and I had multiple of them. They admitted me to the hospital and then the next day hooked me up on an EEG. I was having seizures repeatedly, so they had to intubate me, and it was called status epilepticus. They transferred me to a higher level hospital, and I remember this so vividly because I was very confused. But my left arm was so painful and I didn't know why yet. But eventually when I woke up a little bit more from the sedation, my arm was infiltrated. Nobody was in the room. My arm was infiltrated and it was so painful. I remember they came in, they turned off the meds, and I was just screaming and crying. Never acted like this, but the meds literally make you crazy and confused. And they stopped the medications and my family finally shows up and the arm that was infiltrated had propofol and fentanyl in it. And apparently when I was intubated, they were having trouble sedating me and they didn't know why. I was maxed out on propofol. I was on really high doses of fentanyl. But the answer is because it was just infiltrating into my tissue. And the resident that was taking care of me told me to my face that my arm was not infiltrated. For the next 2 days, I was in and out. I was talking and falling asleep and drooling and unable to hold a conversation. They had to keep me in the ICU for longer because these drugs were just seeping into me still. They kept denying that that's what was happening, and my arm was in pain. So do you want to know what they gave me? They gave me more fentanyl for the pain. And so I have fentanyl and propofol going into my system still, and more fentanyl going in. Also, they pumped me full of antibiotics because they thought maybe I had meningitis, and that's why I was seizing so much. They did the lumbar puncture, did not find anything. I remember waking up. I was just a completely different human being. I don't even know who I was. I don't even remember much of it. But I just remember that moment waking up and my arm was just burning in pain. It was so stretched. I don't know how that resident looked me in the eye and told me that I didn't have an infiltrated arm, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, so I got discharged with new medication. Obviously, I was on Keppra, and they also put me on an anxiety medication because I guess Keppra gives you anxiety, and I was already having anxiety. So here comes my medication trail where they start giving you medications for the side effects that the medications cause. So after that, my life just spiraled. I couldn't go back to work as a travel nurse because I was having seizures. So my partner finished our contract out and I cut mine. Every appointment I had, they just kept putting my medications higher. Every time I went to an epileptologist, medications higher. Every time I went to a neurologist, medications higher. And every time I ended up in the hospital or ended up at a doctor's office, they would diagnose me with something different, something new, something different, or question a diagnosis. Or it was like I couldn't trust any of them. My initial diagnosis was epilepsy. They found epileptic waves at the first hospital I was at. And then the second hospital I was at, after I was drugged to the max, intubated, they didn't find any waves. Eventually, I ended up in a hospital and they had me hooked up on the EEG post drugging me, with Ativan. And he looked at me and told me I was having spells. I was already upset because every time I ended up in the hospital, I got a different diagnosis. I got someone telling me something this way, that way, you're going to die. My epileptologist that week before I ended up in the hospital told me I was at sudden, unexpected death in epilepsy patients. Suit up. So this whole week, I'm probably spinning out because of this. I end up having a really bad seizure, rolling seizures, taken to the hospital, and I'm in the hospital, and that's when this astroneurologist comes to see me. That's my neurologist when I'm admitted to the hospital. And this man tells me I'm having spells and it's okay. And he tells my partner that he can just let me seize. So in 1 week span, I have a epileptologist telling me that I'm at sudden unexpected death. And then I have a astroneurologist telling me that I'm just having spells, as if a witch is casting spells on me or something. Nothing made sense. I lost my mind after that. I just lost trust in everything. I just didn't understand why I was being pulled in such directions. Why are you scaring me that I'm going to die if I let my seizures go? And then turning around and telling me I'm just having spells, like dizzy spells. You're just going down. So this is when I started really looking into seizures. I was like, what is happening? I need to start questioning things because I was just going with everything. I was just following the system, what the system was telling me. Go to every specialist, every single specialist. I had doctors getting mad at me because there's too many cooks in the kitchen. But I was in hospitals right and left, almost like I didn't have control over any of it. It was very much gaslighting. It was very much abusive, in my opinion. And I truly think they were poisoning my brain. I finally got myself steady after all that madness on these medications they had me on. And for about a month, I was seizure free. So I was ready to go back to work. I applied for a travel contract, went to Vegas, started that contract. And 4 weeks into the contract, I'm sitting in triage. The entire back of the ER is full, obviously, like every other ER in the country, but not just full of ER patients, half full of admitted patients basically living in the ER because the entire hospital's full. And there are 30 plus patients in the lobby, and I'm sitting in triage, and a patient walks up to me upset, in pain. I explain the process. When we have a bed, we'll be able to pull you back and help you. And patient gets upset, rips blood pressure cuff off, smacks it in my face, and then just exits the building. I turn to the registration clerk next to me, and I was just like, whoa. And just a few seconds later, I started vomiting. And a few seconds after that, I had a seizure, and they took me back, and I recovered. The next day, I received a call from my recruiter for my travel company that the hospital was canceling my contract and they don't see this working because of the seizure. And at that point, that truly woke me up. It broke me, but that's my breaking point where I was like, okay, no hospital is protecting us in any way, regardless of travel nurse versus staff nurse. And of course, as travel nurses, you're the first one to get disposed of. That's the easiest thing for them to do. As a staff nurse, you'll get retaliated against, but they'll still do it in other ways. They might not be able to get rid of you, but they'll find a way to hopefully make you want to leave. And it just woke me up. And that's when I started doing my own research, decided that I wanted to heal myself and figure this out. Now it's 2024, probably February, and I just had it with the medications. My brain felt robbed from me. My brain was shaking in my head. I could feel it and I couldn't think straight. I couldn't even think for myself. I was depressed, just deep depression, anxiety, and a totally different human being. I could feel it. So I turned to my partner. I told him I'm done. I'm done with the medications. I'm literally not taking one more. I'm not putting one in my mouth because I was still having seizures. And I said, there's no risk in this because I'm still having seizures. So the risk is stop taking and I still have seizures. So I looked up online, what can you naturally do for a nervous system like this that's dysregulated, having seizures? What do I do? And it told me about the keto diet. And at first, I started with the keto diet that I see everywhere marketed, packaged food, keto, friendly, all that stuff. And it still wasn't working for me. So I really got down to a whole food based diet, nothing processed, just real food. We really got separated from food as a society. And I never learned as a kid. And I think a lot of us struggle with what food really is. And I truly believe that food is medicine. That medicine cured me. It cured my seizures. I ate high-fat foods, ate meat, eggs, yogurts. I ate everything they told us not to eat, to avoid. And I live by this. I tell everyone I can, because our chronic illness epidemic, after going through what I did, I truly believe and now know is diet driven through our food industry and whatever they're doing to our food. As a nurse, I had no idea. I had no idea why there was such an epidemic. Why are our hospitals so full of patients? Why are our nurses so unfulfilled? We go into this job because we want to help, but the part that a lot of us don't realize is there's no way to help unless we tell the truth. And the truth is, this nation is being poisoned on purpose, and we're just seeing it in the hospitals. We're seeing it in our mental health patients, our psychiatric patients. We're seeing it in our chronic illness patients, our abdominal pain patients. They most likely can be cured through food, everything. Emergencies, car accidents, amazing care here in the United States. But our chronic illness care is zero right now. And it's hurting our nurses. It truly is. And for decades, we've been talking about nurse burnout and staffing issues, but nobody is talking about why that's happening, why it's an issue, why nurses are so morally injured and unfulfilled. And the answer's right there in my story. Every single thing I went through is a puzzle piece to this empire that they've built upon our suffering. And I truly hope with this podcast and this space that we can share our stories. I'm going to be having people on here that have worked in the system, have seen the system for a long time, that are new to it, that have left it, that are still in it. I want to be able to show the public everything that we're going through. I want a space where we can tell the truth, where we can be and not be afraid of any retaliation. And that's exactly why I created this podcast, because I truly think we need a space where nurses, healthcare workers, anyone can tell their story without the fear, without the censorship, and just the truth of what's going on in healthcare. It's often overlooked, and I think that's why we're at this point in the industry where you're going to start seeing just floods of nurses leaving. And this is an opportunity for us to take back our healthcare system. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Next week, you don't want to miss the episode. We are talking about advocacy for patients. I had a very strong advocate for me, and I truly believe that he saved my life from the system. So you don't want to miss out on this one. Make sure, guys, subscribe, share. We need this word out. We need to start talking about the truth that they don't want you to know. Welcome to the Realistic Nurse Podcast. I'll see you guys next time.